आदरणीय प्रोफेसर हरीश त्रिवेदी जी, ललित कुमार जी और प्रोफेसर उदय नारायण सिंह जी। ये पुस्तक अभी अभी साहित्य अकादमी से प्रकाशित हुई है और इसके सम्मानित संपादक हरीश त्रिवेदी जी और ललित कुमार जी हमारे बीच है। आदरणीय उदय नारायण सिंह जी हमारे बीच है, कृपया मंच पर पधारें। पुस्तक अमरनाथ झा सेलेक्टेड एसेज ऑन लिटरेचर, लैंग्वेजेस एंड यूनिवर्सिटी एजुकेशन।
कैसे हो सर? ठीक ठाक है, बढ़िया।
हम अकादमी की ओर से प्रोफेसर हरीश त्रिवेदी जी, आदरणीय उदय नारायण सिंह जी और ललित कुमार जी का बहुत ही स्वागत और अभिनंदन करते हैं। मैं साहित्य अकादमी के उप सचिव डॉक्टर देवेंद्र कुमार कुरेश से अनुरोध करूँगा कि वे हमारे अतिथियों का साहित्य अकादमी की ओर से विधिवत रूप से अंग वस्त्र भेंट कर अभिनंदन और स्वागत करें।
अच्छा, this is the book. That's the book. I haven't seen. They haven't sent you the book. No. That's ridiculous.
आज जिस पुस्तक पर चर्चा होगी वो अमरनाथ झा सेलेक्टेड एसेज ऑन लिटरेचर, लैंग्वेजेस एंड यूनिवर्सिटी एजुकेशन और इसके सम्मानित संपादक हरीश त्रिवेदी जी, ललित कुमार जी और चर्चा करने के लिए हमारे बीच आदरणीय उदय नारायण सिंह जी, अकादमी की ओर से अभिनंदन।
हेलो, आपको किताब नहीं भेजी
सर? उस दिन आए थे
तो ऐसा कीजिए, अभी कहीं है कॉपी, तुरंत ले आइए। नहीं, ऑफकोर्स सुनो किताब। नहीं, सुन लो।
मैं संक्षेप में आज के तीनों अतिथियों का आपसे परिचय करवा देता हूँ ताकि आप सभी पहले से उनसे परिचित हैं और अच्छी तरह से उनके काम से पूरी तरह परिचित हैं। प्रोफेसर हरीश अकादमी की ओर से अभिनंदन करता हूँ। आदरणीय उदय नारायण सिंह जी नचिकेता के नाम से जाने जाते हैं और मैथिली के प्रख्यात लेखक और अनुवादक हैं। बांग्ला, हिंदी, अंग्रेजी, संस्कृत और गुजराती भाषाओं के भी आप जानते हैं। आप ACLIS एमिटी यूनिवर्सिटी हरियाणा गुड़गांव में चेयर प्रोफेसर के पद पर कार्य कर रहे हैं। आप मानव संसाधन विकास मंत्रालय के अंतर्गत केंद्रीय भारतीय भाषा संस्थान के निदेशक, विश्व भारती के प्रथम प्रतिकुलपति, रविंद्र भवन विश्व भारती शांति निकेतन में प्रोफेसर तथा कई अन्य प्रमुख पदों पर कार्य कर चुके हैं। आपकी लगभग 60 कृतियाँ प्रकाशित हैं, जिनमें आपके मौलिक 9 नाटक, 7 कविता संग्रह, बांग्ला में 6 और मैथिली में 7, आपकी 27 मौलिक, 23 संपादित और 8 अनुदित पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हैं। आपकी उल्लेखनीय कृतियों में मध्यम पुरुष एक वचन कविता संग्रह, भूप चतुर्दशी कहानी संग्रह, नो एंट्री महाप्रवेश आपका नाटक और साहित्य अकादमी से जेल की डायरी अभी उसका हिंदी अनुवाद भी प्रकाशित हुआ है। आपको श्री गंगानाथ झा मेमोरियल पुरस्कार, ज्योतिरीश्वर सम्मान, मिथिला विभूति सम्मान जैसे अनेक अलंकरणों से विभूषित किया गया है। साहित्य अकादमी पुरस्कार जैसे प्रतिष्ठित अलंकरणों से आप विभूषित हैं। मैं अकादमी की ओर से आदरणीय उदय नारायण जी का बहुत स्वागत और अभिनंदन करता हूँ। पुस्तक के संपादक ललित कुमार जी वर्तमान में दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के DU कॉलेज में अंग्रेजी के शिक्षक के रूप में कार्यरत हैं। आपको कलिंग साहित्य महोत्सव बुक अवार्ड 2022 में और वैली ऑफ वर्ड्स बुक अवार्ड 2023 से सम्मानित किया गया है। आपने हरिमोहन झा के प्रसिद्ध मैथिली उपन्यास कन्यादान का अंग्रेजी में अनुवाद किया है और हिंदी उपन्यास 12th फेल का सह अनुवाद भी किया है। वर्तमान में आप प्रधानमंत्री संग्रहालय एवं पुस्तकालय, तीन मूर्ति भवन, नई दिल्ली में फेलो के रूप में कार्यरत हैं, जहां आप डॉक्टर दीनदयाल उपाध्याय जी की जीवनी पर शोध और लेखन कर रहे हैं। साहित्य, अनुवाद और भारतीय राजनीति तथा इतिहास के प्रति आपकी गहरी रुचि है, जो आपके काम में भी स्पष्ट रूप से झलकती है। हम डॉक्टर ललित कुमार जी का भी अकादमी की ओर से बहुत स्वागत और अभिनंदन करते हैं और अभी मंच हम हवाले करते हैं आज के अतिथियों के और पुस्तक पर चर्चा के लिए बहुत ही आदर के साथ आमंत्रित।
धन्यवाद।
अनुपम जी इतनी सफाई से हिंदी बोलते हैं कि जब डिस्कशन की बारी आती है तो दुविधा में पड़ जाते हैं कि हिंदी में बोलें कि अंग्रेजी में बोलें कि कौन सी भाषा में बोलें. But as you know, Amarnath Jha was a multilingual person and he was almost at ease in 5 or 6 different languages, and it's a great honor that Sahitya Akademi is paying a tribute to this great son of India. And I would say that also great son of Mithila, although he was living outside Mithila for quite some time, particularly in Allahabad. But as you know, Allahabad those days was a hub for so many things. If you just look at the way Allahabad has emerged as a cultural center, so it's not just Sir Rabindra Bhavan, or not just Amarnath Jha. We also had Mahatma Upadhyay, Umesh Mishra, Jayakant Mishra ji, and so many other people. And it's known for Agayji, it's known for so many people, Bachchanji, and so many other people. So it's very interesting to see how the book has been conceptualized. I mean, I don't have a copy, but I have seen the PDF copy of this book, and I think it's very good idea to bring in different kind of perspectives on Amarnath Jha here. There is some essays by Amarnath Jha, some writings in translation done by the very ably, efficiently from Amarnath Jha's writings, because many of the essays have been written in Hindi or in other languages, and also some lectures which are in transcript. Then there are a lot of reactions of other people on what Amarnath Jha was like. So his students, like Agayji, so, and of course his colleagues too. So this is very important way of presenting a scholar, because it's very difficult to imagine that there will be a book like this until perhaps Harish had thought about it, because I was talking to Lalit in the morning and I understood that the whole idea started from him. And of course the student was able enough to follow up with that idea. So let me first begin with Harish Dwivedi, whom perhaps I would say in some life he must have been from Mithila, because he has been encouraging a lot of research on Maithili and Mithila and Bihar for whatever reason. So I will start with Harish and try to find out what were the compulsions of coming up with a book like this. Why this book?
Uday, thank you very much, and thank you for the ultimate compliment that any Mithilawala can pay a non-Mithilawala. That even though I had the bad luck of not being born in Mithila this time, I must have been born there in some janma, some purva janma. What a nice way of accommodating me in the elite which centered around Darbhanga. Actually, I'm not entirely innocent of Mithila. Many years ago, I was invited to give the Maharaja, is it Kameshwar? No.
Yes, sir.
Kameshwar Singh.
Yes, sir. Kameshwar.
There is a memorial lecture for him held every year in Darbhanga. And therefore I travelled to Darbhanga to give that lecture. And one of the main organizers, perhaps the main organizer, was Hetukar Jha, Professor Hetukar Jha. The best way of describing him to anybody who knows about Hindi literature or Indian literature is that as soon as I began talking to him, after having looked at, what he looked like, I was immediately reminded of Nambarji, Nambar Singh. Now that's a very high compliment indeed, that he looked a bit like Nambar Singh, that he talked like Nambar Singh, And there was a definite resemblance, though the Nambaji again had the misfortune of having been a Mithilawala perhaps in the past life, not in this life. So, when we were coming back from Darbhanga to Patna, for me to catch the flight back, Hetukarji suggested to me that we should do a book like this. And I told him that I was then in the council and the advisory council and the general council of the Sahitya Akademi. So I told him that it will be no problem for the Sahitya Akademi to publish it, because we had already initiated a series of books of essays by prominent writers from many languages. And we thought that we'll build up a whole library, a whole series of such volumes. And 2 volumes had been published in that series before this one. One was the essays of K. Ayappa Panikkar, edited by K. Sachidanandan, and the other was from Odia, essays of Natapal Samantarai, edited by the most distinguished scholar and editor of Odia literature among those writing today, Professor Sumanyu Satpathy, who's sitting right here. So we thought that perhaps we could slot it into that series, and gradually it will build up. But for many kind of reasons, that series has not been as fruitful as we imagined it to be once upon a time. Anyhow, this book belongs to that. Why was I attracted to Amarnath Jha? I never saw Amarnath Jha. I was not taught by him. But as I say in my dedication here, Amarnath Jha was not only the architect of the golden age of the University of Allahabad, he was also its icon. He represented that in a way that no other single person represented that. This is put in perspective by the fact that, as you said, there were any number of distinguished scholars in so many fields there. And there were also creative writers like Bachchan, like Firak. Firak and Amarnath Jha were 6 months apart in age. And they were great friends throughout. And a greater contrast could never be found between 2 persons who are so enormously talented. So that's the kind of thing that Allahabad represented at the time. Allahabad's academic reputation was based on more or less the same kind of reasons as the reputation of Oxford. Oxford in the 1860s and 70s had been transformed from being a medieval university of monks and ordained priests to the modern age by Benjamin Jowett of Balliol College. He established very high academic standards of a kind that did not prevail before. Oxford's reputation is quite new. And Allahabad, called Oxford of the East, has a reputation which is even more recent, modeled on that. So one was that there were high academic standards. It was not only a playing ground for gentlemen, which it was earlier, both Oxford and Cambridge. When Byron was at Cambridge, he was not interested in studies at all. And he had a suite of 2 or 3 rooms, and in one of them, he kept a bear in a cage. He kept a bear. That's the kind of things people did in Oxford and Cambridge. The parents were very happy to get rid of them for 3 or 4 years. And they were off their hands, and they did all kinds of anything but academics. In Cambridge, there was a kind of racing ground, horse racing ground close by. In Oxford, there were other distractions. So Benjamin Jowett did that. And one test, I mean, we think it's recent, but one test of what high academics means is not only now in the corporate capitalist age, it was always so, was what kind of a job does a bright undergraduate after getting a degree get? What's the placement? It was true even then. And Oxford became the great center for producing ICS officers, which Amarnath Jha caught on to, and Allahabad became the great center for producing IAS officers. There was a personal factor behind that, his father Ganganath Jha, you got an award named after him, he did not allow Amarnath Jha to go abroad to sit in the examinations for the ICS in London. By the time his younger brother Adityanath Jha came up, the examination was held in India as well, and Adityanath Jha, Amarnath's younger brother, became an ICS officer. I met him actually. When he was the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, he was invited to St. Stephen's College where I was teaching then, and we had a longish chat about Allahabad and about other things. So there was this kind of vicarious fulfillment in Amarnath Jha's own life of people going into the highest administrative positions in India. Number of his students became that, who paid tribute to him here. So this is his functional role as an institution builder. There's only one former teacher of Allahabad. He was Vice Chancellor of Allahabad for 3 successive terms. Before him, his father Ganganath Jha was the Vice Chancellor of Allahabad University, also for 3 successive terms. You think that this kind of family patronage and nepotism is a new thing? No, it's not. It's always been there. But there was such a huge contrast between Ganganath Jha and Amarnath Jha. Ganganath Jha Mahamahopadhyay, in the traditional mold of Sanskrit scholarship, who had modernized himself enough to be acceptable to the British as a Vice Chancellor of the premier university. And Amarnath Jha was a Sahib. He was nothing if not a Sahib. Very anglicized, in manner, in scholarship. So that's how the book came about. And one thing we decided very early on, there were collections of his essays earlier, selected from his English writings, but he wrote in English on writers who were not English. He wrote on Kipling, he wrote on Shakespeare, those essays are here. But he also wrote on Brijbhasha poet Bihari. He also wrote on Urdu poets. There's a whole book by Amarnath Jha on Urdu poetry and poets.
Now, this brings me to a kind of statement that he makes in this, which is there in the book. This is about language, Indian language. Now, what should be our language of the nation nation which is to emerge as an independent nation? And at this point of time, the Gandhi camp following Hindustani and some others saying that no, pure Hindi should be the language of the nation. I think it's a very interesting essay that he writes, and sometimes he has the courage to enter into controversial areas as well, like talking about Urdu. Is it an Indian language at all? So, very interesting points on language issue. Being a polyglot, being a language literature scholar, I think his views on this was very important. I'm sure you would agree on that. Whether we all align with his thoughts or not is a different idea. But he made his points very clear. And he was against the admixture of languages. Whereas what we see today is a very easy translanguaging that's happening. Even in teaching, you go from one language to the other, which is a very common thing. And it's not in India alone. last 2 months I've been in Nigeria, I've been in Kenya. I've been watching how in the education system the trans-languaging has entered in a very big way. So when you're teaching English, you're not teaching English alone, you're teaching through Swahili, you're teaching through Hausa, and this is a very common thing. So he was against mix-up of these languages. So what do you feel about being a professor of English? What do you feel about his views on language?
I will say one or two sentences, and after that Lalit will begin with Amarnath Jha's preference for Maithili as the medium of instruction at the primary level. He will go into that. Amarnath Jha was the only person saying that. He entered a note of dissent about that in a committee, that Maithili should be, in the Maithil area, the language of instruction at the primary level should be not even be Hindi, it should be Maithili.
But at the same time, he also said that all Maithils must make it a point to be excellent in Hindi and English, to be able to represent themselves.
And in order to go to Allahabad. But you know, the big thing is, when Amarnath Jha is saying, Hindustani is nothing except Urdu by another name. Urdu is not an Indian language. Even if a Hindu begins writing in Urdu, he calls himself a kafir. Such are the conventions. He said such wonderfully bold things. And
also he says that our mythology, our icons, our stories are not really at all reflected or referred to in Urdu literature.
Exactly.
Which is the point.
Exactly. You know, his friend Firag Gorakhpuri, close contemporary, he was the first poet to introduce Indian mythology and Indian Puranic tales into Urdu poetry. Before I pass this on to Lalit, Ada mein khishti thi tasveer Krishna Radha ki. Ada of an Urdu or I shouldn't say Muslim, an Urdu lovely lady reminded one of Krishna and Radha. Ada mein khishti thi tasveer Krishna Radha ki, teri nazar ne fasane nalo daman ke kahe. Nal and Damayanti are evoked by the way you look.
This is very rare.
This happened at the same time that Amarnath Jha was pleading.
Discuss this book on Amarnath Jha with the two luminaries of Indian literature who I have always admired. Professor Trivedi has been my teacher and mentor for years. So when he offered me to work on this book as a co-editor, I leapt at the opportunity, knowing it fully well, that in one single meeting, in one meeting with him, one can learn more about research and Indian literature than one would by reading multiple dry volumes of research and Indian literature. And that journey began. Before I respond to Sir's take on Maithili or Amarnath Jha's stand on Maithili that he took in 1930 in a committee in which Dr. Rajendra Prasad and Dr. Sachidanand Sinha worked, I would like to narrate a story with you, a story that I grew up listening to when I was in the Mithila region of Bihar, a story which had left an indelible imprint on the mind of Amarnath Jha. The story is set in the 15th century, 16th century, 15th, 16th century in a village called Sarisopahi, which was Amarnath Jha's ancestral village. So in Sarisopahi, there was a scholar, a legendary scholar called Ayachi Mishra. Ayachi literally means someone who is not a yachak, जो कभी किसी के सामने हाथ नहीं फैलाता हो. So Ayachi Mishra was so famous that scholars from Nadia, Banaras, and other centers of Sanskrit learning flocked to his house. So one fine morning, one scholar dropped by to learn Nyaya and Dharma Shastra. Nyaya, that is logic. But unfortunately, there was no food left in the house. He was a scholar but poor, as scholars used to be at that point of time. So they had nothing to offer to the guest. So his wife went to the backyard and dug the earth to extract the roots of a vegetable called khamarua in Maithili. And while doing so, she stumbled on a pot of gold, a pot full of gold coins. Ecstatic, she ran to her husband, thinking that her days of misery and poverty are over. But her husband said that Dharma Shastra say that the treasury that comes from the earth must go to the king. So he asked his young son, Shankar Mishra, who went on to become another legendary scholar, and later on Amarnath Jha in fact wrote an edited volume on Shankar Mishra's book called Rasha Varnan. I will come to that later. So Shankar Mishra was asked to carry that pot to the king's court, and with the help of someone from the village, he went to the king's court. The king was very happy, very pleased with the honesty of this young man and his father, and the king asked him to recite a Sanskrit shloka. So this 5-year-old boy told the king, "Tell me, my king, I should narrate a shloka of my own or someone else's." So everyone started laughing, everyone burst into laughter. At this, the young boy said in Sanskrit, "Balo aham Jagdanand, name bala Saraswati, apurne panchame varshe, varniyami jagatriyam." Which means कि मैं तो बालक हूँ, लेकिन मेरी जो सरस्वती है वह बालिका नहीं है. अभी तो वैसे मैं 5 वर्ष का भी नहीं हुआ हूँ, लेकिन आप कहेंगे तो सारे संसार का मैं वर्णन कर सकता हूँ. The king was mightily impressed, and he gave him his garland made of diamond and precious stones. The boy scooted off, and on his return, his mother was once again very happy. But again, the father interrupted, saying that, "Do you remember when he was born, we did not have even a single penny to pay to the tanner's wife, the midwife, and we had promised her that his first earning will be given to her. So go and please bring her." So the tanner's wife came, the midwife came, and she got that garland, that precious gift, and then she used that property to build a pond which is still intact in the Darbhanga region of Bihar. So Amarnath Jha and all those people who belong to the Sarsipahi village of Bihar, when Amarnath Jha was in Allahabad with his father Ganganath Jha, when Ganganath Jha joined Mayur Central College as a professor of Sanskrit, during summer vacation, the father and the son returned to the village. So he had grown up listening to such stories which highlighted the importance of scholarship. So no wonder his father was an eminent scholar, so eminent that I would like to tell you that when Gandhi came to Allahabad University in 1929, he told the assembled crowd that you may end up becoming as mighty as the king of Bikaner. You may end up becoming an accomplished lawyer like Tej Bahadur Sapru. You may end up becoming an eminent scholar like Ganganath Jha, but you will never be able to achieve that eminence, that preeminence that they have achieved. And Ganganath Jha was such an eminent scholar, the scholarship ran in his blood. So whenever Amarnath Jha returned to his ancestral village Sarsipahi, where his parents had migrated from, another famed village of Mithila called Mahishi. Mahishi was the birthplace of Mandan Mishra and Bharti, who had engaged Shankaracharya, supposedly engaged Shankaracharya in the Shastra and defeated them. So that family had migrated there. So these stories are often narrated to kids even today in Mithila in order to highlight the value of his scholarship. Though, as Professor Harish Trivedi pointed out, Amarnath Jha wanted to be an ICS officer, but his father, despite being a scholar, he too had some element of orthodoxy. Mithila was also called the land of orthodoxy, and some Dharma Shastras, especially Manu Smriti, forbids the crossing of the sea as a taboo. So he did not let his son cross the sea, and Jagdish Prasad Mathur, who was Amarnath Jha's student at Allahabad University, later wrote an essay called Amarnath Jha Jivan Nirmata Adhyapak, where he talks about this episode that Amarnath Jha always felt bad because of this episode. He had some sort of resentment against his father because of this. And there is a reason why his father couldn't muster the courage. Though it's true that Manu Smriti forbids the crossing of sea, but it forbids other things also. For instance, it forbids the eating of fish. It says that we should not eat fish because fish eats the meat of all the animals. So it amounts to cannibalism. It also forbids gambling, hunting for the king. But some prohibitions were accepted by our society. In our society, some weren't. So, but society was so orthodox. If you allow me, sir, very quickly, I would like to share the story about Darbhanga Maharaj's crossing of our sea. In 1932, during the second roundtable conference, Maharaja Kameshwar Singh went to London. On his return, the society boycotted him. Some Brahmins boycotted him. He was excommunicated. And the Maithili public sphere was divided into two parts, Bilaiti party and Deshi party, Swadeshi party. So Bilaiti party comprised those who supported Darbhanga Maharaja's crossing of the sea, and the Deshi party belonged to those who excommunicated him. In fact, his brother, 2 years earlier, in 1929, he was suffering from some skin disease. So his Italian doctor had advised him to go to Italy for treatment. They had hired a steamer, and but the night before he was supposed to board the steamer at Bombay, his courage failed him. He was not sure how will he face the society, what will he tell his uncle. So these taboos had stopped him. And there is one more word I would like to add here quickly about what Harish mentioned earlier about his stand on Maithili being made the medium of instruction in primary education. So in that committee, Bihar Education Reorganization Committee in 1940, when Amarnath Jha was asked about his opinion on Maithili, he insisted that kids must be educated in their mother tongue. But Rajendra Prasad and Sahijanand Sinha disagreed. Dr. Sahijanand Sinha was scared. He feared, what if Bhojpuri speakers also put forward similar demands? And Maghi speakers also end up putting forward similar demands. So Amarnath Jha ended up putting a note of dissent. This is what I wanted to say.
No, thank you for pointing out some of these things which are not known in general to people. But one issue is, what I'm quite intrigued about is that what are you all doing in English department? Amarnath Jha, Harish Trivedi, Lalit, what are you doing in English department if you are studying Indian languages and Indian literature? So this is a question which of course intrigued me even when I joined MS University Baroda, thanks to B.J. Patil and Pancholi and all those people. As you know, Baroda is so famous for so many things in the English department for things which are not English. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see the English studies in India? Should we do what you have been doing? That is, you are not just studying English literature in the traditional sense, you are studying a number of things, particularly the Indian culture, Indian literature, Indian translation, the issues of contemporary writing, the concerns of authors. So, can you say a little more about that? Because Lalit, I understand, has an MPhil and PhD both in this area, working on Maithili literature, but in English department. And you have been the person responsible for that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you know what happened was, Angrez chale gaye, Angrezi department chhod gaye. There is a great anomaly in all this, and the English that we taught was exactly the English that they were teaching. I remember for a very long time afterwards, I mean, in the 60s and the 70s, the syllabus reform, which happened to occur in my time when I was the head of the department, that happened only in the 1990s, late 1990s. And in many other...
After 30 years, I think.
Yeah, and in many other places, like Allahabad, it has still not changed. Because one can be... I mean, the royalists are more royal than the king.
Yeah.
But what we were able to do is not exactly what I wanted. I had a 5-point program, the Panchadhatu as I called it, and we had perhaps 3.5 dhatus implemented, but not the others. You know, there's a German boy about whom I heard recently, and he was asked why he did English in Germany. And he said, because my marks were not good enough to get me admission into the German department. I wish that someday in India too, that kind of situation will obtain. Meanwhile, in answer to the specific question that you asked, I would say that my own endeavor, together with a number of supportive colleagues, I could not have done it alone. There were 400 college teachers solidly with me in that endeavor, while the English department in the university was solidly against me. So we outflanked them. But that was subverting the old system from within. Now we need a reordering of the whole system, in which we'll also approach the kind of pride and relevance both that our own languages and our own literatures afford us, and doing them in English translation, and the English department does not. I'd like to bring in one particular personal thing about Amarnath Jha. His book is there for all of you to read. Lalit told me this only a few days ago. It's not in the book.
Okay.
Lalit had said in his part of the introduction that he had grown up hearing all kinds of stories about Amarnath Jha in Mithila, because they were very proud of him. And recently he told me that one of the stories that his father told him was that a wedding for Amarnath Jha had been fixed with Indira Gandhi. Now, this is the highest that not only a Mithila resident, but resident from any part of India can go. And it seems, I mean, what does it show? It shows that in Mithila, they thought that Amarnath Jha could do anything. And they were pretty close to the truth. Because, as I mentioned in my part of the introduction, there is Tejikar Jha, Hetukar Jha's younger son, you know him. So he's bringing out lots of stuff about the family and so on. Amarnath Jha's wife came from the village, did not have the kind of advantages that men did in those days, did not have much education. In any case, she died of a disease, long disease, when Amarnath was 29. A year or two afterwards, a young student called Sham Kumari developed a massive crush on the teacher Amarnath Jha. And Amarnath Jha was also taken up with that lady, and for 1 year they were deeply attached to each other, and Amarnath Jha also showed his inclination openly by having a regulation changed in the university so as to facilitate something that this young lady wanted to do. This young lady was called Sham Kumari Nehru. She was a Nehru. There was this connection. And Sham Kumari Nehru was the daughter of the youngest uncle of Jawaharlal Nehru. So, a cousin. And Amarnath Jha used to be invited, there is an extract here, to parties at Motilal Nehru's birthday. There is an extract from his diary here. Now, if the Jhas and the Nehrus had combined, the Kashmiris and the Maithils, God knows what more could have happened in India.
That's nice. It's nice way of putting it. I would also like Lalit to say a little more about this issue of what do you feel English studies should be doing. Similarly, what should the studies on Hindi department should be doing? What should be the studies in Maithili department be like? Because this is true of Bengal, because Bengali departments, people have been actually traveling outside the Bengali literature for a long, long time. And very interesting work has been done. So what is your feeling about English studies in India?
Sir, when I joined the English department of Delhi University back in 2008 as an MA student, Professor Sumanyu Sarpati was the head, and I'm glad he's sitting in the audience today. So he encouraged all of us, many of the young scholars, to explore the print history of their respective mother tongues. So he tried to de-anglicize us in a big way back then. So we felt inspired to explore the print history of Mithila. Animesh, my friend Animesh is sitting here, he explored the print history of Uriya Public Sphere. Many of us did that. But I am glad to point out here that Amarnath Jha was a visionary in many ways. And I would like to place him in the long list of distinguished scholars which the two of you represent, in fact, to a big extent. In India, we have a rich tradition of scholars who taught English literature, who studied English literature, but they played an instrumental role in enriching Indian languages and literary traditions. And to a great extent, they ended up becoming what Anant Murthy calls himself, a critical insider. A critical insider, because one can look at the best and the worst of both the worlds and extract and make a fusion, make a mixed sort of culture. And Amarnath Jha was a visionary in the sense that in the 1940s, when very few of us could imagine that in an English literature department, a student would be encouraged to write a history of Maithili literature as a part of PhD dissertation, he asked his student Jaykant Mishra, who was pursuing a PhD back then, to write a 2-volume history of Maithili literature. That's the first full-fledged history of Maithili literature written in English. Later, it came out in the form of a book in 1951. And 2 years later, Jaykant Mishra brought out another history of folk literature in Mithila. So that was a visionary step. So despite being a professor of English, there are some essays where he gave concrete pieces of advice to Hindi students. For instance, he asked them to go back to their villages during summer vacation and make a list of 20 wedding songs, 20 songs, and archive them in the department, add a glossary to it, and who knows, he may have advised them to translate them into English too. So these kinds of exercises he did. And on a lighter note, sir, to add to what Professor Trivedi earlier said, that Mathis thought that he can do anything, I feel that even in Uttar Pradesh, some scholars, some writers felt that Amarnath Jha could do anything. In the 1950s, sir, there was an intense debate taking place in Uttar Pradesh about how to improve the moribund education system. Contrary to what we believe, even back then, the unemployment among the educated youth was a big challenge. The then Education Minister Sampurnanand in 1950, he was mortified to know that students from rural background still believed that Gandhi was alive and happy. He was living in Delhi. He was surprised to read it in a report that postgraduates in economics could not explain inflation, deflation, and the postgraduate in history did not know who Rahim was, who Ghalib was, who Mirabai was. So he was shocked beyond measure. And then a Hindi author, Kishori Das Vajpayee, एक जाना माना नाम हुआ करता था उन दिनों. मैंने कुछ पत्र देखे थे जो दिनकर साहब ने, रामधारी सिंह दिनकर ने उन्हें लिखा था अपनी व्यथा दिखाते हुए कि मैं अपने बेटे से बहुत परेशान हूँ, अपने दुख को ओवरकम करने के लिए मैं वाइस चांसलर तक बन गया लेकिन मुझे राहत नहीं मिली. तो वाजपेयी साहब ने एक लेख लिखा था 5 जन में 1950 में. वहाँ वो कहते हैं कि यदि एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर बनने लायक इस देश में कोई है आज के दौर में, वो है सर्वपल्ली राधाकृष्णन. But look at the topsy-turvy policy of the government that he has been sent as an ambassador to the USSR. And if another person deserves to head the education ministry, he is Amarnath Jha. But he has been appointed the chairman of the UPPCS. So such topsy-turvy policies of the government lead to the unemployment among the educated youth. This is what I wanted to point out, sir.
Thank you for bringing out those issues. Now, there's another point here. People who have been actually master of many languages in India, Amarnath Jha is the best example. And today happens to be also the day when Rajkamal Chaudhary translating himself, or almost recreating himself in English. And it was not really very easy to find that Tagore was also writing like Vidyapati as Bhanu Singha. So, person dabbling in several languages creatively, is that something which you think is one of the features of Amarnath Jha? that he would be good in many languages, good in writing in many languages, or reading stuff in many languages. So is that something which is a future, or is it something which is an aberration in India?
Yeah, you know, I think there are two kinds of perceptions about multilingualism in India. We have many languages living cheek by jowl, and therefore, you know, overlapping territories, and except in some cases, it's a peaceful coexistence. Though there are instances of hostility and oppression of one language by the other as well. So, and lots of people feel that they know 2 or 3 languages even now. But I would say that they need to be distinguished from a real multilingual like Amarnath Jha. All of us like to think that we know many languages, and actually we don't even know even one language. This is the reality of the situation. As a linguist, you know that bilingualism, multilingualism can be of several kinds. There is additive bilingualism, 1 + 1, which makes 2. There is sometimes half-hearted, half-baked multilingualism, so 1 + 1 makes 1.5. And then there is subtractive bilingualism, in which 1 + 1 makes only 3/4 of one language, because you don't know the other one, and your first language is ruined anyhow through that effort. So we make many easy claims about multilingualism. Amarnath Jha, I would say, my own test of multilingualism is, if you read 10 books per year in your first language, do you read at least 3 books in the second language? If you write 10 articles per year in your first language, do you write at least 2 articles in your second language? That is true functional, high literary multilingualism. And Amarnath Jha excelled in that. With the Shyamkumari Nehru episode, he was not 5 years old, he was a bit older, Amarnath Jha at that time, but he composed to express his grief at having to withdraw from that relationship. He composed a Sanskrit shloka in the best tradition of the Mahamahopadhyaya, the father. When he was truly grieved, he had to go to Sanskrit and compose a shloka for that. Now that is the true kind of multilingualism that he practiced. In any given intellectual or emotional situation, one of your languages will come and choose you. You don't have to choose it. I'm sorry to say that, you know, that kind of multilingualism which a number of people practiced in earlier generations is now on the wane. It's not increasing, it's decreasing, and that's partly because we think that English is enough. So many of us think that, and that Indian English is enough. Any kind of English is enough. So I do not know, I'm not very hopeful. We made attempts, there are exceptions, there are wonderful exceptions here and there, but as a general rule, I think the level of competence in any language has, I think, declined, and this goes together with the decline of the humanities and the decline of humanist values, because technology, profit-making, the corporate world, capitalism, they all align against this kind of culture.
But this is not something which is an exception in the Western world. There is profit-making, there is capitalism, there is everything which you mentioned, and yet there is a lot of writing happening, a lot of people reading, a lot of new kind of films, a lot of new theatre emerging, a lot of new kind of music, new kind of lyrics appearing. So what is it that is going wrong in India?
Well, they were not colonized for 200 years. You know, they were able to maintain faith and pride in their own languages while learning other languages. Here, we were made to believe that our own languages are rubbish and that only English is good. This kind of a thing continues even today. I mean, look at the Japanese, look at the Chinese. They have greater pride and efficiency and competence in their own languages, first of all, and then in the foreign languages. Here, we were taught that our languages and competence in them and literary production in them was always inferior to production in English and derivative of that. I do not know what I mean, we've been independent for such a long time now, 77 years. Long enough for 3 generations to come and go. But I do not know whether there is reason for hope very much in this. How do you see this?
Well, I had a lot of discussion with Girish Karnad once. I said, your mother tongue is Tulu. Why did you write in Tulu?
Yep.
Why are you writing in Kannada? And why are you writing in English? He said that, look, the market economy is such that if I write in Tulu, nobody will read, nobody will buy, nobody will publish. So therefore, I have to think of writing in my second mother tongue, which is Kannada. And since the Indian states are, the way the states have been sought about in 1956, after the States Reorganization Commission has worked, it is always the case that there is one big brother in a state and there are other younger brothers, sisters in the state. So somebody who is writing in Toto or writing in Korborog will not really go with that. So, Chandrakant Murha Singh, unless he is also translating his Korborog poetry into Bangla, he doesn't go anywhere. So that's the problem that's happening. And I think a lot of people have really migrated into the other language like Pranishwanath Renu for that kind of reason. So that at that point of time, it didn't seem to be very attractive to write in that language and to succeed within quote. So that could be one reason.
So where will it end? In Hindi, we are very proud of the fact that Hindi literature is a bit like Hindi films. The heroine comes from South India, the hero comes from, the hero is a Pathan, the music director is Bengali, the lyrics are written by Urduwalas. Similarly, Hindi literature. Premchand comes to us from Urdu, Nirala comes to us from Bengali, Muktibodh comes to us from Marathi. So this kind of hierarchy and mobility and upward aspiration towards writing in a language that would really reach further, isn't our attraction towards English a culmination of that?
But they have been watching that many of the African writers
Yep.
were writing in English. Many of the Latin American writers writing in English. And therefore, the aspirational language is English. Similarly, the Hindi has taken up the same model. There are people who have been doing very well, or who have done very well in writing in Hindi, who could have also written in their own mother tongue. So that's the issue here. And there are very few people who would proudly write in 4 languages, 3 languages equally well, and keep on devoting that kind of time. So that is very important, I think. But anyway, it's
Uday, apart from you and me, can you name 2 others?
No, there are people.
I know.
But I know the work on this book was, I'm sure, very tough.
Yeah.
So I would, on behalf of Sahitya Akademi, definitely like to thank, not just on behalf of Sahitya Akademi, on behalf of Mithila, on behalf of readers, and on behalf of lovers of language and literature, I would say that this has been a great book which has come about, and I would definitely urge every one of our people interested in studies on Bihar, studies on independent Indian history and culture, and also in literature, to be reading this book and to be looking at this book and see how exactly the book has been conceived about, and what glowing tributes people have paid in this book to the maker of one of the modern Indian universities, Allahabad University. so many of people have been writing so much about Amarnath Sahib. So I would say thank you very much for very enlightened discussion.
Thank you very much.
धन्यवाद
Thank you.
संजीव हरीश त्रिवेदी जी, ललित कुमार जी। इतनी रोचक बातचीत हुई है और इतनी जानकारी भरी बातचीत हुई है, जिससे एक ऐसा कुतूहल बना है कि अब साहित्य अकादमी को इतना तो विश्वास हो गया है कि पुस्तक बहुत बिकने वाली है, बहुत लोगों तक पहुँचने वाली है और एक पाठकीय रुचि डेवलप हुई है। मैं आप तीनों ही विद्वानों के प्रति बहुत आदर व्यक्त करता हूँ, बहुत बहुत आभार। और अगला कार्यक्रम हमारा लघु कथा पाठ का है और मैं अपने सहयोगियों से अनुरोध करूँगा कि मंच पर